All right, we're back with part 2 of railroads in United States history. I'm going to just read a couple quotations from our excellent textbook. Growing labor unrest accompanied industrialization. Well, industrialization creates labor, right? The greatest strikes first hit the railroads only because no other industry had so effectively marshaled together capital, government favors, and bureaucratic management. So people in corporate buildings far away from the everyday worker out here. The Great Railroad Strike of 1877 heralded a new era of labor conflict in the United States. So we're going to talk more extensively about unions in another video or maybe in class. But suffice it to say, the first big unions were tied to railroads because railroads were the first big industry in the United States. And the dreadful, the financial bubble, the financial trouble of 1873, of course, the corporate overlords of railroads cut workers' wages while their tax dollars going into subsidizing the railroads. And workers went on strike from Baltimore to St. Louis, shutting down railroad traffic, the nation's economic lifeblood. We'll get to that in a second. Panicked business leaders, friendly political officials reacted quickly. Local police forces were unwilling or incapable of suppressing the strikes. Right? If you're John the cop here in Chatham and there's a strike going on, and I don't know of any particular strikes here, you're probably not going to go crack the skull of your cousin who's striking here, right? So governors called out state militias to break the strikes and restore rail service. Governments, state and federal governments, send in soldiers, armed soldiers, to make the workers go back to work. So, of course, railroads literally connect everything, right? Literally, they connect everything. So if you're up in Cairo, New York in 1900, if you're up in Cairo, New York in 1840, your shoes are going to come from a person down the road who makes shoes, a cobbler. By 1920, your shoes are probably going to come from some far-off place, maybe Binghamton, Endicott, New York, and they traveled where there's a big factory and there's a person, all that person does all day is put soles on the shoe, right? Soles on the shoe, and the next person puts the laces in, and that's it. That's that person's whole life. And you don't make a lot of money doing that because you don't have to know a lot. Sorry. And they make thousands and thousands of shoes. They go into boxes. They go on a train. The train takes them all over the place, and the person in Cairo, New York winds up with it. Just like you wind up with an iPhone that was made on the other side of the world, right? The t-shirts you're wearing, the cotton was probably grown in Texas. The fabric may be made in China, cut and dyed in Honduras or somewhere in Latin America. So, you know, this sort of internationalness and things being made by people you don't know far away, that's railroads connecting it all. So if the railroads go down, the person in Binghamton can't make shoes. Well, they can, but the shoes are just going to pile up in a warehouse. If you work on a farm and you need a new plow, and the plow is made on the other side of the state. So railroads did literally connect everything, and they led to great specialization. So you can be only putting soles on shoes. You don't really have to know how to do anything else. You can be operating a steam engine. You actually have to know a lot to do that. You can be fixing track. You can be fixing track. It used to be a person's job to just go along the track endlessly and look for spots that needed fixing because you didn't want the trains to derail. You didn't want it to go off the rails. So much of our idioms, our language in this country is tied to railroads. Oh, really going off the rails here. That's a train going off the rails. We got to keep chugging along here, folks. We got a lot of history to cover. Chugging along comes from the sound of a steam engine. So our language today, these things that persist, these idioms stick with us, all started with railroads. All right, so back to our point. Capital and labor, very American. It didn't start in America. The Dutch started it in the, I guess, 1600s, but certainly America is the place where capitalism has taken off, and the financial capital of the world is, of course, at the other end of this train line. Well, this train line that's now gone is in New York City, just down the river from us. So very American, capital and labor, and capital trying to make more capital, usually at the expense of labor, labor trying to get its fair share, and we're going to talk more about that later. Another something very American about this, and I'm sorry to turn a little dark here, but no pun intended, that was terrible. Sorry to get sort of depressing here, as if labor strife isn't depressing enough, but you know, we're going to talk, our next topic after capital and labor and industrialization is conquering the West. We'll talk about that phrase a lot. And of course, railroads were a huge part of our life here in Columbia and Greene counties and on the East Coast, but they also connected many places. The Midwest is full of railroads, and of course the Transcontinental Railroad, I think 1868, look that up, which connects one ocean to the other. You now have a way to get across America relatively safely, and of course faster than ever, on the Transcontinental Railroad. Big point, big deal. When the Golden Spike was put in, there's a National Historic Site there in Promontory Point, Utah. So, to read from our book, as native peoples were pushed out, American settlers poured in. Aside from agriculture and the extraction of natural resources such as timber and precious metals, two major industries fueled the new Western economy: ranching and railroads. And of course, both of those things are very much the antithesis of how Native Americans lived their lives, and people descended from Europe pouring into the West on railroads and being able to ship crops and meat. My God, the amount of beef and pigs and hogs that were raised and fed in the Midwest and were slaughtered in Chicago, and then the meat distributed all over the country. Oh, there's another example of specialization, right? If you worked on the family farm, the husband and wife had to work together to raise crops to feed the pig. Then they had to slaughter the pig. They had to know how to cut up the pig. They had to know how to smoke and store the pig. They had to know how to cook the pig, right? Now, there's a farmer making grain, maybe raising the hog in Indiana, ships the whole hog to Chicago where a specialist kills it, another specialist cuts it up, someone else puts it on a train, the train brings it to the store, another specialist stores it, and then you go in and you buy it, and all you have to know is how to cook it, when you used to have to know everything. Yeah, it makes life easier, makes food cheaper, but I'm talking, you know, major changes to the way people live their lives. All right, so our second thing there, abuse of minorities. Native Americans, of course, treated horribly, broken treaties as railroads opened up the West. So number 2 on our list of what makes railroads very American: abuse of a minority. Number 3, we've talked about this at length already. I do have an actual list here. Specialization. Right? Specialization is a huge impact the railroads had, and I just went into that from pigs to shoemaking. You didn't have to be a Renaissance person anymore. You could just own a store, and someone else made the products. They came in on the train. You had the product. You sold the product to somebody. They didn't. So all along the way, everybody's a specialist, as opposed to life before railroads. Number 4, government in bed with big business. Welcome to America, everybody. And there were all sorts of money made. This is Republican Party. I hope. did you watch the video, this PowerPoint I made about the history of American political parties since 1865? I hope so. One of the main points, and this is neither good nor bad, is that the Republican Party was generally the party of business. And of course, this time period we're talking about, the Republicans are dominant because it is still after the Civil War, and the Democrats are still sort of down and out because in some way they lost the war. So government subsidies, government just handing over taxpayer money to railroads, giving the railroads land to run the road, is a big part of it. Now, maybe that's socialism, huh? Is that socialism? We got to talk about socialism, don't we? Huh? Well, maybe I'll work on that tomorrow. When it's going to be snowing and I'll be working inside. But yeah, we got to talk about this. Is that social government giving money to railroads? Think about that. Think about that. Also, something very, I think, American about the railroad is it gave immigrants their start. Here's a little immigration lesson for you. The newest people to America almost always end up doing really the hardest, I guess what you might call lowest level, often the most important, frankly, work. Today, if you have a company, even a local company, come and put a roof on your house, which is really hard work, roofing, and you kind of, you got to know what you're doing. Odds are the people who come and put the roof on your house are not going to speak English. We had a roof put on our house a while ago, different house, and the two men who did it were unbelievable workers. Smoothest workers I went out and just watched them for a while, the way they would cut, and they didn't speak a word of English. I don't know where they were from. They were very nice. I gave them soda and food. And we're going to need a roof on our current house, and I already talked to a company about it, and the guy told me that most of his labor is not from this country. They're immigrants. So roofing, extremely hard work, difficult work, and there you have an immigrant group doing it. Lots of health care that doesn't require an education, a fluency in the language, home health aides, that type of thing, is done by newer immigrant groups. And it's how you get your foot in the door, how you get started and move up the social ladder. So the Chinese did it, especially in the western part of the United States. Irish did a lot here. They were new on the railroads, but the Chinese did a tremendous amount. By 1880, over 200,000 Chinese migrants lived in the United States. Once the rails were laid, companies still needed a large workforce to keep the trains running. Companies employed Irish workers in the early 19th century and Chinese workers in the late 19th century. So the railroad requiring hard, unskilled labor gave immigrants a chance to get in the door. That is number 5 on our list of what is very American about railroads. Number 6. Railroads, we already talked about this a little bit, but I'm going to get into more of it in a minute in part 3 of our conversation today about railroads in U.S. history.